What's up, guys? Synchronaut here, and I have my new song, Hold Me Closer, pulled up on Ableton. Thank you, North Origin, for liking this tune enough to want to release it with your label. Super awesome of you guys. I really love this song, put a lot of heart into it, and I thought it would be fun to give you all a track production walkthrough and show you kind of what went on behind the scenes as I was producing this one. So what I'll do is I'll show just my kind of overall organization, template, arrangement, a little bit of the foundation of how I build out a tune, and then we'll listen to each element, talk about some of the sound design and production that, process as far as processing goes, and then take a listen to the song. So let's dive into it. So here's my groups. I have sidechain trigger. Basically this just, it tells other elements in the song when to like duck for the kick. It's just my way of going about doing it. And then we have vocal group, drum group, bass group. Sidechain to vocal is basically all of my melodic elements, atmospheric stuff, things that I'm gonna want to duck or create space for the vocal with. And so I usually at the end I'll group everything together and I will throw it in this sidechain to vocal group. And then I have a sidechain group where just anything that's going to be sidechain to like the kick or to vocals, it gets routed to this group, kind of keep it all in one place, which is pretty cool. It's just kind of an efficient way of going about it. But yeah, let's dive into this a little bit. So I tend to arrange things a little bit differently depending on the track and depending on whether I have vocals. In this case, I actually found these vocals on the source is Vocalfy. I love the vocals that are on Vocalfy. It's basically professional recorded vocals that are provided through there. You can subscribe to it, you can pay for vocals, you can work with artists exclusive or vocalists exclusively even. It's just a pretty great source for it. And so when I heard this song as when it was available, I immediately spoke to me and I wanted to produce something around these lyrics and these words. So I immediately grabbed the vocals and wanted to start working on this. And what I typically do with arrangement when there's vocals involved is if the vocals are pretty laid out in terms of, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, break or bridge, verse, or, chorus, that's it. I'm like, okay, that's a pretty good solid like starting point for how I want to arrange my song at the end of the day, right? So I kind of think about the order of those vocals and the story that's being told, and I'll usually build around that. And so what I did, the first thing I did was I brought the vocals in, make sure everything was like timed accordingly in terms of the BPM and everything. And then I started mapping everything out. So I knew this is an extended mix. So I knew I was going to have 16 bars of an intro. And I was like, well, might as well have the verse start right off the bat after that so we can kind of get going with the song at the end of the 16 bars. So I already knew verse 1 is going to start at bar 17. Then I knew like when it changes up in the lyrics to the pre-chorus. So I'm like, all right, let's, map out the verse how I want to with the rhythm and the groove of the tune. But this is going to be that section. Pre-chorus, we'll put the pre-chorus, vocals in here. The chorus or the build. So I like to have like a drop, the high energy, part of an EDM song or electronic song. I like to not have vocals in drops unless they're like creative or vocal chops for the most part. And so I knew that the chorus of these lyrics would probably also be the build in this song leading into like the drop where you're dancing and moving after the tension gets built. So this is going to be drop 1 after the first chorus. Verse 2 started. So after that first drop, I was like, all right, we'll just start the next verse right after this first chorus /drop. And then will lead into a break, give everyone time to breathe and see a change up. And then we got another pre-chorus to chorus. And in this chorus, I knew it was going to be a big build because I love cinematic epic builds. A lot of my music has trance inspiration, so it comes from there. So most of my songs are going to have a longer build section. And so in this case, I have the pre-chorus, and then I brought the chorus back in, and it repeats. And then we get to like the big main drop. And then I basically cut some of the vocals up and I put them in this section for the drop to add just some extra pieces to those layers for the big main drop before the outro and then the extended outro of the song. So I kind of mapped out the arrangement early on with just the vocals before I really started working on all the melodic pieces to it. But typically I would start with drums, like your kick, your snare, your clap, your main hats. Then I go on to some supporting drums. Then I jump into chord progressions, bass line, add some like leads or melodies, depending on the vibe I'm going for. And then I'll go back, maybe do some more supporting drums, fills, things like that. And then I'll go on to ambience, atmosphere, ear candy stuff, that sort of thing. So in this case, I did vocals first just to get them kind of laid out. Didn't really focus too much on processing them just yet or anything like that. But I just wanted to get them there so I knew what I was going to be working and building around. So we'll come back to vocals, but for now, let's just dive into some of the other layers I have here in terms of the building out the foundation. So after I got those vocals put in place, I usually am working on like the main drop of my song. So I'm usually trying to put together like what's going to eventually be one of the higher, more energetic parts of the song. And then when I go to like expand that loop and arrange it, I'll usually work backwards and just remove elements in different sections leading up to those like higher energetic parts. So in this case, I'll start with the drums. Like I'll start with the kick. We got the kick, we got the main clap. We have a loop. I call it a wooden perk loop, but realistically, it's just like organic beats, more Afro housey type vibe. You got some bongos in there, some hand drums, that sort of thing. I just call it a wooden perk. This is my template, so like, it just makes me think of ideas. I don't use every piece to it. And then I usually like to throw some toms in a song. It's just, I love a good tom. It's like low end with a little bit of high end coming in, but it's not filling in like taking up space where the kick is, but you still get some like low end bassy tones to it. And it's a good way to just add some groove depending on the rhythm you're going for. And then I have this attack loop in here. Basically, it's just texture. There's like some vinyl crackle in it, some noise, some, synth melodic like tones type thing. I just thought it was an added piece to add some character. And then I have an open hat, of course. Got to have an open hat on every offbeat, basically, just to keep that groove going. That's one of the main elements, and I'll usually kind of slightly pan it, just very subtly, to create a little more space for the main, other main elements that are going to be in the middle. And outside of that, for drums, just like some fills, crashes that are in different parts of the song. You'll see like over here we have a snare build, we have a reverse clap, we have some crashes, reverse crashes to crash, and that's like honestly really it for drums, and then just periodic, some movement. So I have some automation where maybe there's a filter that's taking out the highs periodically and like making it quieter, or when taking out the lows and just only letting the top end come through. So you'll notice that when we listen. But yeah, so that's drums. And then we have the bass group, which is basically sub bass, a sustained respace that is layered with the sub, just an octave up. And then we have some bass, it's like a bass harmonic pluck. So just to give it an extra punchy, growly, kind of bassy hit on top of like a sustained note. So we have a note that's kind of going, right? And then we have the bass that goes, so it's two different sounds, which means it's easier for them not to like clash and be muddy or anything like that. But it adds more character and depth. So I have a few different layers there, and then the sub layer just makes sure things stay nice and clean in the low end. And you know, if you're listening to it in mono, it's sounding good and there's no issues. On top of that, so after bass, we got all these melodic elements. So again, I'm a sucker for like epic cinematic stuff. You know, I really love trance music. In my production, I tend to bring a lot of trance inspiration to my sound, even if it's considered progressive house, melodic house. I bring a lot of trance elements. So with that, orchestral elements or something I always like to throw into my music in some way, even if it's something that's real subtle or small. And in this case, it was the violin. I love violin sound. I love a good string. You know, it just adds like an emotion to the music. It's a little more organic. And so you'll notice that for the chord progression in certain sections, like verse 2, I have a violin chord progression. In the break, this is like a violin pluck that I use to layer on top of those violin chords. And then there's some filter automation. For the big build, you'll see this like long note right here. This is basically just like a high string that I added on top of the chords to give it some more tension, and you'll hear that too in a bit, which is really cool. So those are like live instruments there. Sometimes I'll use piano, you know, to map out chords. Sometimes I'll use violin to do it. Cello, if I want to keep things like deep, I'll use a cello and layer that with the violin. But in this case, the violin was good enough with like the other bass layers that I had, so I didn't really need to add like a cello. And then let's get into some of the synths here. So for the most part, I use Diva, Serum. Every now and then I'll use Spire. Those are like my go-to synths. But, you know, different synths, different songs call for different synths. So in this case, we used Diva, we used Serum, and we used Spire. So I have a lead here that, you know, goes on top of the violin chords. It's just its own little melody that's taking up this space in these notes. I know this says build violins, but it's basically, I just copied the chord progression over, and it's just chords, but I'm using Diva to create an arpeggiated movement with these chords. So I guess let me just play some of this stuff. So what that sounds like is this. So that's just an arpeggiator within Diva. And then the lead is just a sustained note. It's kind of like that. It's kind of cool. A little bit of noise on there. And I'll dive into like the production of that stuff here in a bit. And then I have like a plucky melody, which is exactly it. It's a pluck. And then I have a subtle crystal pluck is what I call it. And it's just like really low volume pluck that's happening really fast, like really fast in the background. We move on past those main synth melodies. I have atmosphere, and we have a little bit of noise here. noise groups, so like some white noise. Got a little bit of phasing, filter, or flanging on it. We have this one. This actually has like a little bit of a tone to it, synth. So it's just some noise. And then we have some pads for more like atmospheric stuff, just background, melodic atmosphere that fills in the space. And so we'll dive into those in a bit here too. And then we have my effects group. So, I got a pitch riser. I got just the sample riser that I found. Sometimes, like, I tend to use sample riser, and then sometimes I'll use serum and make a riser, depending on if I'm trying to get real specific with it, or the type of riser I want to layer. If I have like a main saw riser that is kind of just staying in the middle, but maybe doing a pitch bend up or whatever, well, then maybe I'll add a layer where it's a riser that is spread and like super detuned and maybe panned a little bit to the right and left. And that way you have this other riser that's kind of engulfing that mid riser layer. Maybe I don't do as much pitch movement up. Maybe I'm just like doing some filter automation instead of pitch automation. And so there's different calls for different risers based on the song and what kind of epicness I'm going for. And then there's this, I found some noise, like this noise sample, and I kind of chopped it up and made it like pulsing a little bit with, probably have like, yeah, this is already going to my sidechain group anyways. And then there's some other effects here. So like just little hits, little ear candy hits that you might hear. So that's like the groups, Atmos, effects, synths, instruments, bass, drums, and vocals. When you break it down, it's pretty basic, right? But that's like the foundation I try to start with when I'm building out a song. I try to get all my elements kind of put together in the highest energy sections. And then I'll build out from there, remove what's not necessary, and, then do movement and different things like that, transition pieces, drum fills, and different sections as we go on. So let's start from that's a loop that I'll build from. Let's go ahead and go to the beginning of the arrangement, and we'll just kind of listen to each section throughout the song. So I guess the first thing I'll bring up is, this is an extended mix. So we got 16 bars of an intro. Whenever I do an extended mix, intro and outro, I try to like really limit the melodic pieces to that intro and outro, because ultimately it's so a DJ can come in and mix in and out of the song. And if they're trying to do it with a different key, it makes it a little bit of a challenge if I got a bunch of melodic stuff in one key all the way through. So usually for the first 16 bars, I will just focus on like drums for the most part, maybe some very subtle melodic stuff, just to kind of like tease the listener to know what they're about to be listening to. But I do keep it pretty basic. So in this case, I have a vocal reverse reverb that I made from just a piece of this vocal. So we hear this. Oh, that's turned off. Hang on. Sorry. We hear this. And then it just cuts. And then it happens again, right? And then as far as drums go, I don't really have much going on in the drums other than like the kick, a couple of the loops that, you'll hear later. And then we have closed hat, open hat. Clap's not there, snare's not there. We're still missing some of the other loops that you hear later. And so here's the kick. And the kick is also filtered at this moment, I believe. Yeah, so I've like cut the kick at 88 hertz. So it's not bringing in all of its low end. I'll bring more low end later once the bass comes in. It's a nice change up, And so Plus, as you're mixing in a new song with a DJ, you might be taking the low end from a different kick anyways. So here's how this intro sounds. Oh, that's the kick, sorry. That's just the drums. Here's how this intro sounds. So the extended intro for this one truly is 8 bars, and then I bring in kind of my melodic pieces for the intro of the song at the 9th bar. So we still keep the same like drums and everything there. And since I hadn't really shown you those drums, we got a kick. Simple kick. It's nice. Still boomy in the bass and the low end. I brought up the low end a little bit more with Pro Q, just to give it a little more boominess. And then I am filtering out the low end just for this initial intro, like I mentioned before. So that's the kick. For the toms, this loop right here that you heard, this is what this sounds like. Filtered out the low end, did a little dip here at about 600 hertz, and then have a low shelf that's cut at 120 just to make sure that, low end's still a little bit quieter. And then I do have a auto filter that is ultimately keeping it real cut just for the intro, and then more low end will come back in later once the bass comes in and stuff. So and then my textural loop that I mentioned earlier with the vinyl crackle and stuff, here's what that sounds like. Hear a little bit of noise, a little bit of vinyl crackle. It's got this like kind of synth percussion hit. I EQ'd quite a bit of it out. It's just there for texture, I didn't need every part of that. And so outside of that, we got some hats. So this is my rolling hat. Keep it kind of short, obviously, because it's going to be more of a tick, tick, tick type deal on every 16th. Have a little bit of saturation with an Ableton. I honestly cut most of it out except for the highs, because really that's all I'm after with the hi-hat. And then I have the top end pushed up a little bit to bring out the sizzle a little more. And I got some panning, so you'll hear it kind of going left and right. It's very subtle, but I just like it bouncing around the ears a little bit. And then, it's got a little bit of verb and stuff. I use aux channels, return channels a lot for, reverb, different reverbs and things. But yeah, here's how that sounds. Pretty cool. And then we have this open hat, which, a little more noise is coming through. I cut it, but not as high as the closed hat. And basically, it's a little bit longer decay, and it's got a little bit more of a ch to it, like like you would hear from an open hat. But it is shorter than most. It fit the vibe that I was looking for. So here's what that sounds. Still hear the metal tinniness of it, which I like in a hat. I don't want it to just sound like noise, so not bad. And so for the most part, that's all you're going to really hear for the first 8 bars. And then as far as Atmos goes, yeah, you'll hear a little bit of rain. I always like adding some type of nature element in my music, whether it's rain, ocean, birds, crickets. It's just It's a little added piece, atmospheric. So, yeah, that's the layers, and that's what you get. And then as far as what you heard with the melodic elements, that siren type noise, I actually really love it. There's what that sounds like. And what that is actually this siren pad that used in Diva, and I love Diva. It's just this nice warmth, like analog modeled synth. I used a pad actually from the Sakura Diva preset pack, which is phenomenal, and just messed around with some of the envelope on it a little bit and some of the LFO movement, but it's really great. The only thing is with this specific preset, I couldn't mess too much with the pitch modulation on there without affecting some of the other things that I didn't want to affect. So every time there's a note change, you hear the pitch movement go up, which is what I wanted. So like you hear that pitch movement happen, but it only does it on the note change, and it didn't do it before. And since there's nothing before, it was kind of random on when that would happen when I started this MIDI clip. So what I did, I just froze it, bounced it out to audio, I freeze and flattened it, made it an audio file instead of MIDI. I just muted that, and now it starts with that pitch bend no matter what, which is what I was going for. So I love it. So you'll hear that throughout the whole track for the most part. And then the other piece of the melodic is this like spinny drone, which is cool. Yeah, I called it a spinny drone. It's basically Ableton's granulator through a vocal sample in there, just like an angelic voice vocal sample, and shortened up where it plays in that like sample, and then sped it up so it's playing it super fast in a loop. And then what I did was put a little bit of hall reverb on to smooth it out and cut the lows out of there, put an auto pan on it to just keep it going, like make sure it's going left and right, so it feels like it's spinning around like this, you know. And then add some groove with Shaper Box, you know. It's just a sign, you know, to make it go. You have that left and right, but this is more of like an up and down type groove, which worked well. And then, whoa, not that. Where'd it go? And then we have like ozone imager on there just to like make sure that I'm not dealing with like any phasing issues. So when I'm playing it, well, there's a little bit going on. That's the reverb, but it's not too bad because there's not a lot happening in this section. So it's not like it's going to really be worrisome. Maybe later. So after that, a little bit more reverb going on, and then I did increase the width on it even more a little bit. So it's just atmospheric, that's it. It's not really a big vocal sound. And then I have this like screech drone. This is actually like made with Ableton's wavetable. It's just a sawtooth with overdrive, saturation on there. It's a bunch of noise and distortion, a couple reverbs to wash that distortion out a bit, and then imager as well to just hone in the spread. And again, it's just atmospheric layer, more of like a noise screech. Sounds eerie and creepy, right? But it fits with everything. So, yeah. So again, like here, now that you kind of hear that melodic pieces to everything. And so at the end of the kicks going there, I took a filter and just took out the lows. That's why it sounds like kind of clicky. Basically, I just brought it all the way up to like 2K. 2K hertz and up is all we hear. That way when the kick comes back in right here and brings the lows back down, it's just that much more impactful. So like, see, so but yeah, let's talk about the vocals here. So I usually bring in the dry vocals first, just hear how they sound. Basically, it's just vocals without any like extra processing on them, based on how they were recorded. And then I will throw my, I'll do some processing on my own for like the wet vocals, put my auxiliary return channels for reverbs and stuff on it, and use that if I like it enough. So here's how these sound by themselves.
I don't know why we keep running in circles.
I'll usually process vocals in like a separate project, just because there's a lot of processing that goes along with them, and then I'll bring them back in after I like how they're sounding, and then I'll just do a little bit more kind of minor cleanup. And then yeah, so let's go ahead and just listen to this verse.
I don't know why we keep running in circles. When we both know it's just gonna end. I don't know why we get stuck in the moment. When it happens again and again.
So that's the first verse. I knew that, I'm still like building energy here, right? So I'm not going to have like too much. I took the spinny drone out. We kept the siren in there for the most part. As far as the synths go, this is where I bring in like the main pluck melody that you're going to hear pretty much through the rest of the song. And then there's like automation and stuff that go along with it. And then the bass hits. So, and then we just have a few loops playing. So here's how this whole thing sounds. Oh, sorry.
I don't know why.
Turn that off. And just in case I didn't already show this, because I don't think I did. Here's how the bass sounds, so we get an idea. We got sub, clean sub, cut at 100 hertz. Didn't really do much there. And then I got Fuser, ducking out for the kick. The bass is ducking for the kick there. So that's sub, low reese, like a mid bass. Everything's kind of spread. Got a lot of voicing there, a little bit of detune. The second oscillator doesn't have as much voicing, so a little bit detuned as well, just to give it more, another layer of depth. A little bit of reverb on it. Real basic, some fine tuning to adjust like the pitch on like a micro level. And then we got this like growly bass plug. I will show you. I have a compressor. So did some EQ cuts here. Took out the top end for the most part. Bottom end, I got a compressor just to bring in more presence to that bass. Also keeping the low end nice and mono by pushing this mono maker up and bringing the stereo width down. Since I have a lot of voicing on there already, it's pretty wide, and reverb, I didn't need to also create more stereo width with the compressor. And I did take out the low end on the sides. Didn't really do anything there. And then keeping an eye on, I use ozone to keep an eye on how my stereo field is looking in terms of width and making sure it's not too wide. So the other layer I have is the bass pluck on top of that. So this gives it just some added character. It's a different envelope, so it doesn't sound the same, but it still hits nice and impactful. I'm using Decapitator from Sound Toys to basically saturate it and give it a little more grit and power, very subtly though. I'm barely pushing up that drive. And then low end is taken out. Of course, just like the other things, I'm using Pro C to compress that initial hit that comes in just a little bit. And then taking out the low end on the sides. And yeah, that's it. So the bass group. Pretty cool. So you heard the drums, you've heard the bass, you heard that siren pad. The only other thing I think in this section is going to be this. It's just like a part of, I call it rise and fall. If there's like sweep that goes up and falls, it's just half of that. So it's just the fall section of it, but it's just noise with a little bit of movement already built into that sample. And so with everything in this verse, here's how that sounds.
Just gonna end. I don't know why we get stuck in a moment when it happens again and again.
So you notice I use like those reverse reverb vocal sweeps for like transitions or letting you know something's coming. It's one of my favorite things to do with vocals. I usually just take like the first section of a vocal or like the first note that they're singing. I'll basically just like sample that one section. I'll throw a shit ton of reverb on it. Then I will freeze and flatten that. I'll reverse that sample, and then you get that sound. So it's pretty cool. And use whatever reverb floats your boat. It's up to you. I usually pick something like Native Instruments ROM. It's free reverb, and they have this really cool preset called Stardust or Cosmic. It's like really long reverb that you can adjust some settings on, and that's usually what I go to for these types of things. But reverse verbs are just a great way to add some of your candy. So I'll have those leading into different sections of the vocals. But yeah, that's that first verse. Pretty cool. So let's move on to the pre-chorus. Pre-chorus, energy starting to rise more. Right, so we got bass, we got everything. Now on top of this pluck. Oh, you know what? I guess I'll show you what I did with this pluck since we did, that is a new element here. So the pluck melody. So what that is it's Serum, of course, trusty Serum. And let me open it up. And basically you have a triangle wave and you have a saw wave. They are a little bit different, but same but different. This one's actually just a little bit warmer, softer. The saw wave's a little more saw-like. It's gritty. So basically, it's just a triangle wave with no unison, no voicing, so more just straight down the middle. And then we have this saw wave that has just slight voicing spread just a little bit. So it kind of like goes around each other. And then we have a noise oscillator, which adds a layer of white noise. And then we have a triangle sub to add a little bit of lower harmonics to the overall sound of this. The envelope is more of a plucky envelope, so short sustained. A little bit longer release, so they don't completely just end when the note hits. And then I have a bunch of macro knobs that are macroing to different things. So like for automation. So like as it's going, I have some subtle filter movement. So here's what that looks like. I don't want to say subtle, but it is kind of subtle. So this is just like the notes as they hit, they're hitting different parts of like this filter. So when I play it, you'll see kind of how the knobs are moving, and it changes the tone just slightly in terms of like volume, or in terms of reverb, or in terms of the level of noise that you hear. So all of these are kind of macroed. So yeah. Right, and then we have some effects. So we got some reverb on there at the end, but hyperdimension just adds some more voices and unison to it to create a little bit more depth. Delay that's exactly what it is. It's a little bit of a delay on the notes. Cutting out some low end with the EQ within Serum, and then bringing the top end up, and then filtering that out so it controls the EQ a little bit. Yeah, so that's the design there. And then a little bit of saturation, cut out the low end some more, did a little bit of a dip here, 2.5 hertz, because we just didn't need that. It's funny that I boosted about 2K here, and then took out the low end at 10K hertz there. And then, what do we have here? Oh, I did some extra EQ at the Pro Q4. Fun stuff. Just must have wanted to play around with sides and mid some more. Took the sides and brought it up in the lower end a little bit, and then did a dip at 4K because that's a little bit of a resonant type area of the frequency field. So yeah, that's that pluck. On top of the pluck, when we hit the pre-chorus, there's 2 new elements. So we have, and a few like effects. So we have this chord arpeggiator, right? So I took those violin chords that you saw earlier. Basically, those are going to be the premise for the chord progression of this. And I basically took those chords, brought them on their own channel, opened up Diva, and made an arpeggiator with Diva using the settings. We got ARP down here, goes up 1 octave. It's, going in an upwards pattern. Oh, you know what? You didn't even see that. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So you got the ARP down here section up, goes up to 1 octave. Pretty solid. So you make chords with it and it'll turn it into a little bit of a pattern. So it sounds like this. Pretty cool. And I use the decapitator to give it a little bit more, drive, some power. Not too bad. Cut out the low end. Then, throw a compressor on there to kind of bring in the peaks a little bit, tame them down, shave them down, but give it more presence in the body. So it's only bringing it down by a couple dB. And then I just boosted the 2K range and cut in the 300 hertz range. A little bit of auto panning to make it kind of go left and right just a tad. It's very subtle, very subtle. And then it's slightly panned to the left. So really nice added element. And then on top of those arps, we added a sustained like lead that has a little bit of noise layered in within it. It's Diva as well for that warmth analog feeling. And we're just using some saws and ultimately have a little bit of chorus on there with noise. And then I have the mix more leaning towards, you know, no noise and just subtly leaning towards VCO1 to add some more noise. So here's what that sounds like. Pretty cool. It's got a little bit of a grittiness to it that gives it kind of that dark feel. And then just know that all of these layers, I'm also using my auxiliary channels. You know, I have different reverbs. So room reverb is just like Ableton's hybrid reverb. I have a middle verb, which is like supposed to like make you feel like you're taking up that middle space of like the room or the hall or whatever. And so I use Valhalla Room for that. And I just made my own preset called mid-range space based on the settings. And then we have like a hall verb where I'm using a combination of vintage verb and UAD's pure plate reverb. Just they work well together. And so I got the settings where I liked them for concert hall, and then adjusted the settings on the pure plate to see fit. And I might adjust these based on what's on there. This is just like my template. And then I usually take the low end out of a lot of these just to avoid mud. And then we got the silk plate. It's just another kind of plate reverb, shorter tail, and it gives it more of a silky smooth type sound. I don't use this too often, but it can be good for like vocals or subtle ear candy effects. I probably use shimmer the most, to be honest. And that's going to be Valhalla Shimmer. I really love it. It like adds reverb to different pitches of the sound versus like reverb to the pitch you're already in, which is really cool. So it adds just this like a shimmer. It's very beautiful. And then I'll do some, like sometimes I'll throw delays in before the shimmer, which is what my template has. And then depending on what's on there, in this case, I'm actually sidechaining like those arps you heard, these ones. So I'm feeding that into the shimmer verb. But then I'm sidechaining the shimmer reverb to those arps. So basically, instead of them just constantly running into each other, they're ducking a bit before the next one like hits, you know. So you can see what's happening here. It's ducking a few dB. Just creates a little more room. And then I'm doing the same thing with my crystal pluck, which I don't know. I don't think I might have played it earlier. So it's just like subtle pluck I made with ambience with Spire. Spire is great for like some trance elements, and there's this pluck called Instant Pluck with Inspire that is just kind of great for this sort of added layer. It's not real important, but it's more of just like added melodics. I did the same thing with that shimmer reverb. Subtle pluck, sidechain it to itself just to create a little more space, but not too much because I still want it to all feel cohesive. So yeah, that's the plucks and ARP design. So when the pre-chorus comes in, we have this lead, we have those chords, the pluck's still going, and then you've heard everything else. There's this rise and fall. Just a fun transition. And yeah, so let's hear the pre-chorus. There's no clap yet, so. The chorus, that small build, I just figured I'd just played like both of those. The only thing really different is I've incorporated a clap and the open hat now, so we're evolving, we're adding with each section, and then we have some added effects. So the clap, or let's do the clap first here. I think I showed it earlier, but you know, it's got that pre-transient, so you hear a little bit of it's more organic. You hear a little bit before the actual loudest part of the clap, you hear a little tiny clap. And then realistically, I just got a little bit of saturation on there. I'm cutting the low end out, have a compressor on it, you know, with Pro C. Honestly, just shaving off a couple dB of like that initial like loudness, and then there's some filter automation, you know, depending on the section of the song, so not too bad. And then I got the open hat. I think I played that already, but yeah, so you have that. Like the first drop, right? So we got that chorus build, little sweep leading into it, reverse verb. I don't know if you caught this, but there's a reverse clap in there. You know, it led right into it. So as that first drop hits, you know, this sweep goes into it. Building some tension there. Basic EQing. So the first drops hits, we hear this as part of atmosphere. We hear. Do you have any more? Our clap continues on through, and then we hear vocal chops. So this was like the biggest piece of that. So I just took a portion of the vocal sample and made some chops and a cool beat or groove to go with it. So this is what I'm using the silk plate for, you know, is for those chops. Just a little more silky smooth, I guess. So that's that first drop. After the drop, we there's also this right here, a little short breath. Boom. Right? Pretty cool. And then we have this little transition leading into the next verse. So the next verse is a little bit different. We have the subtle crystal pluck that I played in the beginning. Right, so you hear that in the background. You now have the arps, the chord arps that came in during the pre-chorus. That's going to continue on. And now the violin is going to come in. And for the violin, I'm using Contact. I personally love just Contact stock violin. I think it's great. It's good for what it is. It's a violin string layer. I'm not trying to just do a violin piece, so I don't need it perfect. But it definitely adds emotional depth to the sound. And so I bring the violin there. As far as like the processing on that, I don't really touch Contact settings for the most part. I add a little bit of saturation, take out the low ends, if I need to or want to. And then I'll cut the sides quite a bit depending on what other synths I have and things like that. Add some compression just to kind of make it a little more cohesive. And then looks like there's auto filters on there. I might have tried to automate it at one point, decided not to. So, but yeah, everything else is pretty much the same except for now on a second verse. I did bring some vocal chops in the half part of the second verse just to tailor back to those chops you heard. And then there's this new sweep that I added in at the end of the verse that will lead into the break. So before the break, we have the things that's going to lead into the break. I have some automation that maybe makes things a little bit quieter just so it doesn't like completely cut into it. And then for the vocals, I brought in this like backing vocal.
Right when we get swallowed up.
And for this one, I actually automated. So in Pro Q, there's this phone preset. It kind of makes your vocal sound like nasally, like you're on a phone. So I automated it to be turned on for this section just to give it a little bit of a different feel for the vocals for the break. There's not as much going on in the break, so just a little bit of a change up there. Still got that reverb tail sweeping, reverb reverse sweeping in. We got a crash now. And then the different instrument that I added here is going to be a plucky violin to go on top of the violin chords. So it's really cool. It's also Contact. It's called a Blueprint Textural Violin. It just has some cool things you can do with it. Basic processing, similar to some of the other stuff you've seen there. And then this white noise LFO. Pretty cool. I did also have this vocal, I just took a sample of a vocal and made a little bit of a ambience with it. Put a ton of reverb on it. Not a ton, but a lot of reverb. And got some saturation there. A little bit of trance gating. So from kilohertz, just to give it some little movement. This is just like an atmospheric piece, but here's what it sounds like. It's real quiet. And then we have some more Atmos Foley. So Rain in a Summer Night. It's kind of nice. And that kind of fades out as things come in. So I did also change this melody right here. When we hit the break, I basically take away the melody. We're still using that synth, so it's familiar, but it's more of just now it turns into more of a tension building thing. And it gets faster and faster as time goes on. So what I'm gonna do now, since you've heard all the layers that this song has, there's just some change up in the notes and how they're playing. So I will show you one last thing, and then I'm just going to play the end all the way through so you get an understanding. I'll kind of move around as it's playing. But, there's two more things that I'll show you. So once we get to the build, I change up the bass. Instead of it being sustained, I change it to more of a plucky, rhythm. So it goes kind of with, the build and the tension. So it's just a nice change up before going back to like what we've been used to. So the sub. Okay, and then it's layered with the same plucky swell, but I shortened it up here. And then as the build happens, let me just open my automation here. You'll notice that on a lot of elements, I'm taking out the low end. So I'm automating the low end out to create tension. You know, here I basically shortened the tail with automation to make the pluck not last as long. You know, here frequency, I'm automating frequency up. Yeah, so a lot of this I'm just automating things to go out. Basically, I'm taking away frequencies, so when they all come back in at the drop, it's just more impactful. And then we have a couple risers here. So like Juno pitch riser. This is a riser where the pitch is going up. It'll just automate up at the end. Oh, I guess I didn't do the pitch actually. Oh, this is the pitch. I must have swapped it. I was like, no. I was like, I'll make the pitch go with the noise riser. How about that? So, yeah, so we got some layered risers there. This is more noisy. This is more tonal. So, and then we have some more noise that leads into the drop. So outside of the bass rhythmic there and those risers, we just have this top counter lead that I brought in. And it's basically to give this drop a different feel from the first drop. But it's Swiss Serum. It's just a couple saws, barely detuned, a little bit longer on the attack, so it takes a little bit longer to get to the highest part of the volume. And then we got a compressor on there, some delay, and some reverb. Real basic, but it just adds a nice layer. So here's how that sounds. I am using microshift. This just gives it a little bit of width, you know, without like getting too crazy with it. So you can see like it's not, I don't have it cranked up all the way. Just adds some more width to the space. So pretty cool there. And what else maybe I didn't show here? You heard that? Yeah. And then once the drop ends, I basically take out the majority of all of the drums really, except, all of the drums. I keep the bass going and some like the violins, the main like lead motif. And then I just have some noise, a little bit of ambience. And then I have a noise sweep that leads into the extended outro, where essentially you're going to, as a DJ, you'll just mix in your next song when that hits. So, let's go ahead and listen from the break now through the end of the song. Now you kind of like have seen everything. So. Yeah, that is like the more majority of the track. I mean, there might be some little pieces in there that I didn't actually share. Maybe like I think there's like a cathedral bell in there that I might have missed, that I forgot to showcase. Yeah, like that. You know, little ear candy pieces. So, you know, stuff like that, it just adds to the atmosphere, which is great. Um, the sidechaining group I have, so all my melodic elements and everything, bass, you know, they route to a sidechain group. The only things that don't really are going to be like, if I want to sidechain, you know, my rolling hats just to create groove, I might just throw like a compressor on the actual channel, or shaper box on the channel, depending on how groovy I want to get with it. But for the most part, we got ring mod side chain modulation here, which basically just like, it's more of a spectral side chain. Doesn't really dip too much in volume. It's more subtle. Then we have soothe. This is for the vocals. So, you know, it's more of the under vocals. Greg Pensato has a preset that it's based off of. And then we have shaper box for pretty much everything else. Bass, things like that. So all the melodic elements will go to this. They're routed to soothe. Well, they're routed to this in general, but mainly soothe here, for vocals to be able to come out more. And then this right here, I use shaper box because it's in multi-band. So, you know, I make sure this 100% for the low end. That way, sub bass and kick is really, everything is moving out of the way for those things. The mid is not as drastic because it's okay if things cross over a little bit. And then the highs even less. Like I don't need to really duck like super duck a white noise sweep, you know, for a kick. It's not really taking up any of that low space, so I'm not going to have the mix all the way up. So you know what, and I realize I'm not showing that, so here we go. So multi-band, everything I just said, and you'll see the mix. So low 100%, mid about 80, high about 70, you know. And then soothe, that's what I was looking at. So sidechain to vocal, you know, I use soothe to really get all the melodics and everything out of the way for the vocal, but not drastically. It's more of a spectral EQ ducking. And then the ring mod sidechain, this is just mainly for the kick, and the bass. We're shaving off a little bit of the transients, but not too drastically. So really cool there. But yeah, hope you guys like this walkthrough. If you know you have more questions about some of this production, hit me up about it. But I really enjoyed making this song, and this is kind of my process with most of the production that I do. And I'm always learning, always open to new ideas. And yeah, hope you enjoy the tune. Thanks again to North Origin for wanting to release it. Happy producing.